Tony Perkins, and this is Washington Watch, the website, tonyperkins.com. If you're on Parler, it's at T. Perkins, and let me again remind you of, got folks standing by to take your phone call, 800-225-4008, if you'd like to get a jump on Giving Tuesday. We've got a $100,000 challenge match. It's right now, ready, beginning. We're getting a few hours early jump on this, so to double your impact for faith, family, and freedom, give us a call, 800-225-4008, or visit tonyperkins.com. All right, with the coronavirus cases starting to rise once again, in fact, we're hearing, warnings that it's going to rise again. It makes sense. People get together and, Thanksgiving, Christmas, you're going to get, things that are contagious, they spread when people get together. It happens. So, as a result, governments are starting to crack down with another wave of restrictions. Some have never lifted them, but others are squeezing again. We've seen houses of worship basically boarded up due to the regulations surrounding the coronavirus. And as you've heard me talk about many times, I think it's important how we deal with this now, because in not only a second wave of the coronavirus, but other pandemics or emergencies that we might face, where we leave off is where we will start again. And that's why I'm so grateful for those that have been fighting for religious freedom. And on the eve of Thanksgiving, the Supreme Court basically gave a win to the First Amendment, freedom of religion, in basically clipping the wings of the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo, in his patch quilt work of restrictions on churches, which actually made no sense. And as the court pointed out, treated liquor stores, bicycle shops, and other places with completely no restrictions or very limited restrictions compared to churches. Now, I've got a clip I want to play of Governor Cuomo responding to the court's decision.
I think that Supreme Court ruling on the religious gatherings is more illustrative of the Supreme Court than anything else. It's irrelevant from any practical impact because the zone that they were talking about has already been moot. It expired last week. So I think this was really just an opportunity for the court to express its philosophy and politics. It doesn't have any practical effect.
No practical effect, all about politics. Joining me now to talk about this is the attorney at counsel in this case, Joe Davis at Becket Fund. They handled this case for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn. Joe, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Joe, this victory, no practical effect, no practical implication here?
Yeah, I don't think that's correct at all. The Supreme Court here was laying down a marker. Governments are on notice that the First Amendment doesn't go away just because there's a pandemic out there. In fact, it was a very strong order protecting Beckett's clients, which is Agudath Israel, which is an association of synagogues in New York City, and also the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn, who also had a number of churches that were affected by Governor Cuomo's orders. So I don't think it's correct at all to say no practical effect.
Well, it's interesting. Gorsuch, in his concurring opinion, wrote about the fact that the governor changed his color code for Brooklyn and Queens, where the plaintiffs are located. Now, and I'm quoting from that concurring opinion, now those regions are yellow zones, and the challenge restrictions on worship associated with orange and red zones do not apply. So the reasoning goes we should send the plaintiffs home with an invitation to return later if need be. And he goes on to basically bat down that idea that the governor basically changed these rules while they were taking months to get to the Supreme Court, and they needed to go ahead and address this. And I think you're right. I think they address the underlying issue of the First Amendment freedom, and that, as you said, it does not go away in time of crisis. Now, let me ask you this, Joe. This obviously is going to have implications for other jurisdictions. I know it's specific to this case in New York, but other governors have to be paying attention.
That's right. And even sticking just with New York for a moment, the governor, a couple of days before the Supreme Court issues its ruling, goes back to the drawing board, redraws the lines to try to exclude the parties that are there before him at the Supreme Court. probably because he was worried about exactly what ended up happening, which is a loss from the Supreme Court. And the court was exactly right to go ahead and issue the injunction anyway. In fact, at the very same press conference in which the governor redrew the lines, he threatened to put the entirety of New York City back into an orange zone. So there's no doubt that this is an ongoing situation. The governor has power. He's asserted the power to just continue locking down different areas of the city as his own lights dictate. And so there's no doubt that the court was right to go ahead and issue the injunctions. In terms of other jurisdictions, that's exactly right. New York was really an outlier here. This is one of the more extreme restrictions on religion that we're seeing across the country since the very earliest days of the pandemic. But as we're entering the fall and the winter, you've seen some other governments start to suggest that they're interested in locking back down. And this opinion from the court serves as a very important marker that governors are on notice that the court will intervene if the restrictions discriminate against religion as opposed to other activities that people engage in.
Joe, to be clear, the issue of religious freedom, the First Amendment, it's not a carte blanche that you can do whatever you want. But in this case, and in so many other cases, what we have is a disparity in treatment where you have, in this case, hardware stores, acupuncture, liquor stores, bicycle repair shops, accountants, lawyers, insurance agents are declared essential, and so they can operate basically as normal. But churches are kept, regardless of the size of their facility, they're capped at a certain number, which clearly is a disparage in the treatment.
That's right. Nobody's saying that the government can't take steps to try to stop the spread of the pandemic. Of course it can, and it should. What we're saying is that it's entirely inappropriate for churches and synagogues, houses of worship, to be effectively shut down entirely, while all sorts of activities, secular activities, are allowed to go forward. While following the churches and the synagogues will follow the same neutral rules that other people have to follow: the mask, the distancing. And there's been no evidence that religious worship is sort of uniquely contributing to the pandemic by any stretch. There was no evidence that any of the parties in this case had any outbreaks at all since the start of the pandemic. And so I think you're exactly right to point to things like percentage caps and things like that. It's just entirely unreasonable to say that a cathedral or a synagogue that can seat hundreds of socially distanced worshipers should be capped at 10 or 25, which is what the governor was trying to do here.
So, Joe, I want to ask you a question, and my listeners have heard me bring this one up before, and if you can answer it, I'm going to send you a free coffee cup. This is one of the things that gets me, is that, and you probably do a lot of traveling as well, but I travel a lot. In fact, I'll be on the airplane in just a few hours, and probably every seat on the plane will be filled. And I've flown from coast to coast with every seat filled for, 3.5 hours. Why can we get on airplanes? And I know they're wearing a mask, and that's fine. But we can do that. But we can't sit in a church for an hour or 90 minutes wearing mask and social distanced based upon the size of that facility. But we can sit elbow to elbow in airplanes.
I think you're pointing at a very good illustration of the overall problem here, which is you've got government officials sitting back and saying, well, this activity is essential and religion is not essential. And, that's just not a judgment that the First Amendment allows the government to make. Religious worship is it's a core part of this country. The First Amendment is the first freedom, of course. And so to say that it's not essential is just not something that the Constitution allows the government to do.
Now, a lot of people are criticizing this Supreme Court decision because it comes on the heels of a previous decision out of Nevada in which the decision went the other way before the new addition to the court, Justice Amy Coney Barrett. But this has to be encouraging that we now have a majority on the court that is supportive of the First Amendment.
So I think that's right. It's clearly an encouraging development, but I would hesitate to point too much at the change of personnel here. I think, the striking thing about this opinion is there was a large degree of agreement among the justices about the basic principles here, and even the dissenters in this case. One of the justices that dissented was Chief Justice Roberts, but he dissented only on the ground that he would have sort of credited the governor's last-minute change in the zones, and he suggested that he might even agree that these zones went too far and that the previous Nevada decision was distinct. And then even with the other dissenters, Justices Sotomayor and Kagan and Breyer, they also suggested that this was a very debatable case, and they relied a lot on the last-minute change in the rules. So I don't think this is a situation in which you chalk things up to a change of personnel in the court. Mm-hmm. These were the court takes the First Amendment very seriously, and this opinion is a great example of that.
Well, I'm glad that the court didn't take that bait in terms of the governor changing at the last minute, because we've seen other jurisdictions do the same thing. You have this is months in the pipeline to get all the way to the Supreme Court, and then at the last minute, 11th hour, they change the rules to keep themselves from being restricted in their exercise of this authority. This way, I think the court has come out with a very clear message, and other executives are going to take note of this before they implement policies in the future. So I think this is a very significant, very important, and once again, grateful for the Becket Fund and other religious freedom organizations that are out there pressing these cases.
Well, we appreciate the support, and I completely agree, especially in the coronavirus context. It's a bit like playing whack-a-mole. I mean, these governments are, governing by executive order. They can change them sort of at whim, and so you get all the way up to the court, and then they try to change the rules at the last minute. So it's an important marker for that reason, and then even more so for the broader reason of establishing that the First Amendment doesn't dissolve just because there's a pandemic out there.
So one final question for you, Joe, as the practical implications of the Supreme Court ruling for the churches in New York. What's going to happen next?
Yeah, so the practical implication is the governor has been ordered not to enforce these 10-person caps and 25-person caps while the case is being litigated. So the case is going back down to the lower courts. We're going to litigate them, try to make sure that the churches and the synagogues can stay open, the houses of worship can stay open, not subject to discriminatory rules. Our clients are willing to follow capacity limitations that were in place before the governor's new discriminatory order, and that's what we'll be arguing for back in the lower courts.
So what do you think the time frame of that will be?
The cases are proceeding relatively quickly. I think we'll get a decision from the lower courts in the next couple of months, and depending on what happens, the case could be back before the Supreme Court in the new year.
Let me. I said it was the last question, but I'm going to ask another one because this is important here. Just as the court took up this and made this temporary ruling, if, for instance, and I don't think it's going to happen, but let's say New York decided in the next 30, 45 days to drop these restrictions while your case is still pending before the court, do you press forward with that case for future purposes, or is the case dropped?
Yeah, I think that's something that will have to be seen on a going forward basis. And I should also point out that we were counsel at the Supreme Court and aren't representing Agudath Israel back in the lower courts. So that's not a decision at the moment that we'd be involved in, but that we'd be advising the client on. But I would say that the important thing is that the churches and synagogues want to open. They're not out here to prove political points, to score political points. They want to serve their parishioners, serve their congregants, and that's what they're seeking in the lawsuit.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the work that Becket does and other religious freedom law firms, and encourage you to press forward so that the next time around, when the government wants to exercise this authority for whatever reason, we have set clear limitations to that authority when it comes to these fundamental constitutional freedoms. Joe Davis, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And folks, to find out more about the work that the Becket Fund does, You go to TonyPerkins.com and follow the links over. And, we have a number of these groups on, First Liberty, ADF, Becket. If you support them, thank you. Encourage you to continue to support those organizations. The work that they do is absolutely fundamental and will only increase in importance, especially if we do see a Biden administration in the future. And, again, for churches, I think, look, we need to be prudent, need to take the necessary steps to protect our congregations, pastors. If you encourage those at risk categories to worship in alternative ways. But our churches need to be open. And we do not need these arbitrary restrictions placed on our churches. When liquor stores and other places can operate without restriction, but churches being limited because they're not essential, look, there comes a time we just need to move forward and do what we know to be right. If we have to suffer the consequences, we will. Prudent along the way, protecting our people, but obeying God rather than man. All right, folks, out of time. Thanks so much for joining us again. Got folks standing by to take your call, 800-225-4008. Until next time, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where it says, you've done everything you can do when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you have taken your stand. By all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.